take a look at our peripheral nervous system, and more specifically at the reflexes and that of the autonomic nervous system, and some reflexes and intro into how the autonomic nervous system functions. So we have essentially the efferent side of the pathways now. So we've looked at the afferent side and our sensory information going in, and now we have our efferent pathways coming back out to help to control things like our muscles. And so because we have essentially conscious and unconscious sides of things, we need to have our somatic pathways and then our autonomic pathways. Somatic pathways are going to control things like our conscious motor, so our skeletal muscle, and everything that is autonomic is all unconscious. So this is things that we don't have to think about. This is information that is going to process and happen all on its own. On the somatic side of things, we can control when to contract those muscles, things like that. So the only thing that we can control on the somatic side are skeletal muscles. On the autonomic side, we have the unconscious control of cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, so our other two types of muscles. We then also have exocrine glands, some of our endocrine glands, and its whole function there is to maintain homeostasis within the body. And so this is going to work to make sure that everything is running properly within every system within the body itself. So there's a little bit of a difference between not just what the somatic and autonomic control, but also in terms of how this actually functions. And so when we look at the two efferent pathways here, we can see that on the conscious side of things, and so our somatic motor control, we have a lower motor neuron that comes out here, and it travels all the way out to our effector organ, which is skeletal muscle. And it's just a single neuron. It runs through that lower motor neuron. Our upper motor neuron was coming down from above, and it synapsed on that lower motor neuron. But exiting the cord and coming out to the effector, we just have a single motor neuron. So there's only one neuron that is there that comes out of that spinal cord. For the autonomic side of things, we actually have two. And so we're going to have two neurons involved here. We have our first, our preganglionic neuron, and then we have our second, the postganglionic neuron. And so there are two neurons that are going to have to be involved in order for our normal processing within the autonomics themselves. Depending upon whether we're talking about sympathetics or parasympathetics, this ganglion here is going to be located in slightly different areas. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the same process goes is that we have a synapse in between. So we're not going to be able to get that information out to our effector organs quite as quickly as that for skeletal muscle. And so at some point, this preganglionic neuron comes in, it synapses, it has communication between the two cells, and then it sends its information out to the effector organs, and it then synapses one more time and releases its neurotransmitter there also. And so on all of our smooth muscle and cardiac muscle, our glands, this is how this process is going to work. Depending upon whether we have a sympathetic or parasympathetic is then going to just dictate where that ganglion is. Do we have a shorter preganglionic neuron and a longer postganglionic neuron, or vice versa? Do we have a long preganglionic neuron and then a short postganglionic neuron? These effector organ inputs allow us to have reflexes so that we can make a quick change. Reflexes themselves are essentially a process where no matter what happens, we always get the same result. And so they're quick and pre-programmed. And so they're pre-programmed where when A happens, we automatically get B. Or when C happens, we automatically get D. And it happens the exact same way every single time. If A happens, we're not going to get D. It can't go that way. And so the same process is going to occur each and every single time this happens. One of the things that we also want here is for it to be quick. We want it to be fast. We want this process to occur very, very quickly when it does occur. And so this is going to happen because we're going to limit the number of nerves and synapses involved. And so we're going to make sure that we only have a limited number of neurons in the process. So we're going to decrease that amount of synaptic delay to make sure that we have more and more speed. So less synaptic delay gives us less, is going to be found with less synapses. That makes sure that we have a very fast response. And so this process is able to go in and out very quickly. The other big thing with reflexes is that we're typically going to do it without any input from the central nervous system. And so as far as the central nervous system is concerned, it's just kind of a relay. It's going to not really have to process this very much, especially when it comes to the brain. And so the cord is going to be the only place where we do this processing for the reflexes themselves. For our somatic reflexes, we have two basic types. We have either monosynaptic or polysynaptic reflexes. Monosynaptic, as the name implies, mono meaning one, and then synapse telling us that there's a synapse. There is literally only one synapse in this process. And so our sensory neuron comes in, it sends the information all the way into the cord, it synapses on the motor neuron, and it goes right back out. So this is our A leading us to our B. And so we get the same response every single time. When that patellar tendon is struck and it starts to stretch out that muscle, we're going to get an immediate shortening of the muscle. And so we're going to get this response very, very quickly. For our polysynaptic type of a neuron, here we're going to have more than one. And so the poly portion tells us that there's more than one. So we've got multiple involved here. That sensory neuron comes in and it's going to synapse on an interneuron. So that interneuron is going to be able to do some processing. And so it can process the information as it comes in. So the sensory receptor is telling us that there's a temperature change. The heat is coming in. And once it gets to that threshold on this interneuron, it's then going to send its signal out to the effector organ and pull away. And so we're going to be able to pull away from that painful stimulus and get away from the potential danger that is there. This one's going to have a little bit of a gate involved, and so we're going to be able to slow down the process, not just have an all or nothing, no matter as soon as it happens type of an event. The autonomics have reflexes as well. So we have peripheral reflexes that are somatic. They're going to involve the skeletal muscles. And then we have autonomic reflexes that involve those of internal structures of the body as well. There are many, many different reflexes that are somatic, running a wide range of responses that can be elicited. Essentially, any kind of muscle has the ability to have a stretch reflex, a deep tendon reflex there, and then we have some skin reflexes and things like that as well. Autonomic reflexes are going to be similar to that of those of our somatics in that they're going to make a change. And so again, when A happens, we're going to get B. And the location is what's going to change here primarily, is that we're going to have this happen in things like our smooth muscle, our cardiac muscle, and our glands. And so this is where our primary focus is going to be for autonomic types of reflexes. Their job is to maintain homeostasis, make sure that things are occurring the way that they should, so that we don't have things fluctuating too greatly and they just stay relatively in a normal kind of up and down. We don't want big spikes either up or down in the system. We want to keep them relatively on an even keel, so to speak, there for those organs themselves. And so we're going to maintain this process. Again, we have sensory stimulation coming in. In this case, we have a monosynaptic reflex, and the information is going to go right back out to the effector organ themselves. Some sort of change has occurred. We got this change in stimulus that requires us to have a response, and that effector organ could be smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, a gland, whichever it happens to be. We have the same basic output that is there. One of the places in the body where we have a slightly different system involved is with the digestive tract. And so the digestive tract has this enteric nervous system. And so the digestive tract has a huge amount of neurons within it. And all of these neurons are there for the functioning of the digestive tract itself. The neurons themselves run in with the smooth muscle, they run in the mucosal layers where they're affecting the mucosa itself. And it's going to essentially initiate and coordinate all kinds of glandular secretions, and so glands, mucus, and smooth muscle control, all initiated by this enteric nervous system. It's going to do all this with no CNS input. So central nervous system is not going to be involved here at all. It's not even going to have necessarily the spinal cord involved. It's only peripheral nervous system, and more specifically, it's only enteric nervous system. And so these are usually going to be relatively small areas involved. And so we'll just have a short little portion of the digestive tract involved at that particular time, perhaps large intestines or the small intestines or within the stomach itself. And this is going to evoke some changes that are local to that area, constantly monitoring what's inside the digestive tract. What is it that we need to digest? What is it that needs to move? Is it ready to move? Can it move from one section of the digestive tract to the next, or does it need to wait? And so this enteric system is almost like having a little mind of its own. Our digestive tract has its own innervation in and of itself that is out of the central nervous system's control. But the central nervous system and the autonomics do have influence over the digestive tract. It's not in there all running on its own. So the peripheral side of the autonomics involves two separate pathways. We either have the sympathetics or we have the parasympathetics. Our sympathetic side of things is generally kind of termed as being fight or flight. And so this is our either stay and stand ground or run away. Which one are we going to do? This can be initiated by things like stress on the body. This can be either real stress or perceived stress, depending upon what is going on at that time. And in a sense, what it is going to invoke is things that, in a sense, begin with E. So these are E types of activities. Things like exercise, excitement, an emergency, or even embarrassment is going to potentially start the sympathetic nervous system running. And when you think about it, when somebody's nervous, they're going to potentially be sweating. Their heart rate's going to be elevated. They're going to potentially be breathing deeper. You may see in the pupils that they're dilated, especially if they're greatly nervous at that point. Other things we can't see are more internal. And so digestion is going to be inhibited. We're going to slow down digestion or even stop it completely. We're going to need energy though. So even if our digestive tract was already functioning, we're going to need energy in the form of glucose, and we're going to get that from the liver. So we're going to convert glycogen back into glucose so that we can have ready amounts of energy to be produced. And then the other thing that's going to be inhibited is urine production. So urine output is going to be decreased as well. All things that are going to allow us to either fight or flee. If we're having to stay and fight, we don't need to be digesting the meal, or it may become our last. We don't need to be making urine, or it may become the last of the urine that we get as well. We need to focus on those things that are going to keep us alive. The parasympathetics are essentially just the opposite. The parasympathetics are going to be our rest and digest. So the general term for parasympathetics there. Parasympathetics are more so involved when we don't need to use a whole lot of energy. Things are going to be calmed down. Things are going to be resting in a sense on those. So we're going to have D activities. And so we're going to do defecation, digestion, and diuresis. And so we're going to do all those functions in that parasympathetic state. Most of the time, we're in a parasympathetic state. We're in a state where we're using our parasympathetics the majority of the time, is in a more of a rest and digest type of a state. And so things like our blood pressure, our heart rate, our respiratory rates are all going to be low. They don't have to be elevated in order to rest and digest, to just relax. Think of being after a meal for parasympathetics. We just had a meal, we need to be able to digest it. So our gastrointestinal tract activity is going to be increased. We're going to increase the amount of blood flow to places like the gastrointestinal tract, as well as to the kidneys. We can make urine now. We can get rid of those waste products that are potentially there um, within the body itself. We're going to decrease heart rate, decrease blood pressure, decrease respiratory, but increased all of the digestion. Just the opposite of what we just talked about for sympathetics. And so the two are going to run in contrast to one another at all times. We mentioned at the beginning that the autonomics use two neurons in their process. And so we have a single preganglionic neuron. And so our preganglionic neuron here runs up to the ganglion. And then from there, our postganglionic neuron runs to the effector organ itself. And so we're going to always have an extra synapse in between the two in order to get that signal all the way from the spinal cord out to the effector organs. And again, depending upon whether we're talking about sympathetics or parasympathetics, we're going to change the location of that ganglion. It's going to be either closer to the organs or further away. So with our sympathetics and parasympathetics, there are some little differences that go along with just simply the anatomical structures in a sense. So for parasympathetics, they have a long preganglionic axon. So the preganglionic neuron is long, but a short postganglionic neuron. Parasympathetics tend to branch relatively minimally, and so they don't have a whole lot of branching that is there. They're going to go out to, and that one neuron is going to affect very few effector tissues. So this is going to have an effect on possibly only one tissue there at that time. The sympathetic side, we have lots of potential branching in that preganglionic neuron. And so it comes out and it's going to hit into multiple areas of ganglion. That preganglionic neuron is also short, so just the opposite of the parasympathetics. The postganglionic neuron is then long, and as it comes down, it's going to potentially affect multiple organs. And so these ones went out to other organs as well, and we have many effector tissues that are now being affected by this simple single output in a sense. And so the process itself is going to change for that sympathetic output. Control of the organs themselves runs along the little differences in terms of things being kind of opposite as well. So for the parasympathetics, again, a few structures all at one time. Sympathetics, many structures that are going to be stimulated all simultaneously as that occurs on those. We're going to get kind of mass activation of sympathetics. If you've ever had a good scare, things like that, you kind of felt the blood rush away from your skin in a sense, you become pale. That mass activation is what's occurring. We're drawing that blood deeper into the body, pulling it into the body, and allowing us to keep it in our vital organs for that fight or flight type of a scenario that's there. The parasympathetics may work more on local changes. And so we may have just a few organs or a couple of areas that need to have that change occur within those areas themselves. So it's not really an all at once kind of a thing. And so it doesn't turn everything on all at once. And so we don't dump blood pressure and heart rate all at the same time as we dump respiratory, or increase urine output at the same time that we do for digestion. It's going to be more of, well, this needs to happen right now, then that needs to happen. It's not that we just ate a meal and so digestion happens, so blood pressure drops, heart rate drops, and so on. It's not all or nothing. But for our sympathetics, it's more of the changes happen all at once, all over the body. And so we get a rapid change. We pull that blood away from the digestive tract, from the skin. We stop urine formation. We increase heart rate. We increase blood pressure. We're simultaneously constricting blood vessels in some areas, dilating them in others. All of this is happening all at once throughout the entire body. So we get this big coordinated control when we need it to happen within the body itself. And then next time we'll talk more specifically about the pathways as we go into the neurotransmitters involved.